Morning everyone, I'm Pete Stevens, I run Mythic Beasts Limited. We've been selling v6 only servers and VMs for a while, and here is some of the pain and suffering from it. How do I make that skip to the next slide? Ah. Winner. So, what's the problem with v4? Some time ago, we gave an IP to every server. Now, our servers have got bigger, they run lots of VMs, we need to give an IP to every VM. And now our VM users run containers, and they want an IP for every single container. So you can buy a 2U box, and it eats 1,000 IP addresses. That's a problem, because IP addresses are running out. So what people are actually doing is you put all of your VMs in private networks running RFC 1918 space, and then someone puts your containers in another RFC 1918 space, which conflicts with the one beneath. And you run an overlay network, and if you're unlucky, you end up with the 7-layer OSI model, where you have a physical layer, Ethernet, some kind of UDP stuff with an overlay network with Ethernet in it, and then some UDP stuff with an overlay network with some Ethernet in it, and so on and so on. And people get really excited and start adding in some VPNs and some encryption, and it starts to get really, really silly. The economics of this for a new entrant to the hosting market are pretty simple. You can go to RIPE, they give you 1,000 IP addresses, you charge about a tenner a month for your VMs. That's £10,000 a month, 100 grand a year, that's it, company finished, no more company for you. But actually, the cost of VMs is continually going down, and it's been going down for a long time, and I don't see it stopping any time. So, the economics are just a disaster for any new entrant to the business. You're screwed. So, IPv6 addresses are effectively free, so somehow we're going to have to work out how to sell people v6 only hosting, or we don't have a future. So that's kind of where we started from. And my good friends at Raspberry Pi would like to point out that their computers are cheaper than IP addresses. It costs twice as much to put that on the network as it does to buy it. Okay? So, yeah. So, what we did is we thought, first thing to do, let's sell some services that have IPv6 only. We give you in IPv4 land, we give you a static address, and we tell our DHCP server about your MAC address, so if you DHCP, you get that static address to make management easy, and it saves customers typing stuff in. For v6, we give you a block of v6 addresses. We can turn on stateless configuration, at which point your machine makes up a random address. That's completely useless for inbound services because nobody knows where you are until people have implemented dynamic DNS and stuff like that. And the other thing about stateless configuration in a hosting network is all of your machines turn on v6 addresses simultaneously and start routing things out over v6, and everything goes mad and the customers get really upset. Don't do that. So, we need to give people static addressing in order to make this work at all. First thing we discovered, you need an IPv6 resolver that your IPv6 VMs can talk to in order that DNS works. So that's the first public service we had to offer to make this work. We hit upon the plan that we were going to advertise our gateways using route advertisements. So our routers just sit there and say, hello, I've got a complete route to the internet, talk to me. And that way you get failover and everything for free, which is nice. And broadly this works. And you can turn on your VM and it works. It has IPv6 connectivity, and you type apt get update to install a security package, and it turns out that the mirror list doesn't differentiate between v4 and v6. So it says, here is a mirror where you can download your updates from. The mirror is v4 only. Your updates fail. This is a pain in the neck. You also discover that you're attempting to talk to some other services on the internet, Twitter, Akismet for spam filtering, New Relic for monitoring, absolutely anything hosted in Amazon. You can't talk to them because none of those people have v6. So this product is basically completely useless for any practical reason. So that's not the future of the company. So NAT64, this solves our first problem. You all know how this works, but basically you say, give me a v6 address for a v4 only thing. It returns you a v6 address on a proxy, forwards the connections for you. You can now access stuff that's on v4 only networks from your v6 only VM. Suddenly, all of these internet services you can now get to. The nice thing about everybody using HTTP, because it's the only thing that goes through firewalls, is it means all of your protocols are basically well behaved, and this gives server applications access to pretty much everything. Problem solved. Of course, nobody can access the services on the VM that you're hosting if they're on a v4 only network. So the next thing we need to do is proxy things inbound. So we implemented a generic proxy service. It runs HA proxy, and through our control panel, you can just go and type in, this is my URL, this is my backend server. It auto-magically configures stuff for you. everything forwards through. It does HTTP, and it does any service that supports SNI. So that's basically anything using SSL. That's fine for new services. You should all use SSL. Please use SSL, use SSL. The other nice thing is the only thing that SNI doesn't work with is Windows XP, but given that doesn't have security updates and is basically insecure anyway, we just said, yeah, well, sod off. We don't care, have a security warning. So that solved that one. The one thing it doesn't do is forward SSH connections for managing your VM, which is a problem we haven't really got a good, proper solution to yet. But at this point, you have a v6 VM. It can talk to everyone in the world. Most of the world can see most of your applications. It's completely usable. You can use it. Hooray, problem solved, internet fixed, let's move on. However, in practice, it's still a little bit annoying because static addressing is a pain in the neck with v6 because the addresses are massive and are slightly bigger than anybody can actually remember, so they always get typoed. So it'd be really nice to do the same thing we do with v4, where it goes into a DHCP server, so when you turn on your VM, it always gets the same address guaranteed to you, and so on. One of the problems that we run into here is in our VM platform, you can upload your own CD image, and you can boot off your CD image and install your own VM and build your operating system any way you like. Turns out the first people who want to buy v6 only services are also the sort of people that want to do their own operating system install from scratch. And the trick here is now your v6 setup has to not only give fully working v6 connectivity to your machine once it's booted, it also has to persuade the network installer on the CD image that it has v6, that it has internet connectivity, and let it carry on and download the rest of the operating system. If you've ever met any of the operating system installers for Linux distributions, you'll know this basically doesn't work very well. So the Debian installer, for example, we give it an address over DHCP6, and then it expects to get a gateway. And because we didn't give it a gateway over v6, we expected it to go and get the gateways by seeing our root advertisements. The installer just decides that, sorry, I don't have connectivity, you can't carry on, no operating system for you. So we ended up that we now have to basically do both. We have to get the DHCP server to also hand out a gateway, which means we need VRRP so we can flip the gateway over for redundancy reasons. And this is all a little bit annoying, but you know it kind of mostly works, and you can just about do it. So at this point, we have a product. It's useful, people can use it, and people can actually host it, and you can actually put real websites on it, like Raspberry Pi, because that's how that one's done. And that's a really useful example for when you talk to customers, because you can say, would you like your stuff to use next generation networking like the Raspberry Pi website? And they go, oh, that sounds good. How much extra does it cost? And you go, it's cheaper. And they're very pleased, and that's good. One of the advantages we get is actually for Raspberry Pi, stuff is now distributed around our data centers in lots of different places. And if we were using RFC 1918 networking, we'd have to route a layer 2 private network round or use VPNs to connect all the stuff together. It turns out if everything has a routable v6 address, all your stuff can just talk to each other. And that includes things in other people's companies if you need to get there as well. So Raspbian, for example, isn't hosted with us, but it means that we can get to that really easily. So it actually starts to make your life a little bit easier, which is nice. So we do a lot of managed services for people. So the next thing we do, now we've got our v6 only VM, is say we want to offer this as a managed service to our customers, which means everything on our list of management stuff has got to work. First thing, backups. That was easy. Put a v6 address on the backup server, add a quad A record into DNS, all of your backups go over v6. Hooray. At this point, we thought the project was going to be finished in about an hour. Monitoring. Type IPv6 into our control panel for ping monitoring, SSH monitoring, and so on. It complains and whinges. It doesn't know what to do. Turns out somewhere in the depths of the code, there's a few things where it looks for v4 addresses, and if it doesn't find them, it complains and whinges and has a faff, which is a bit of a pain. And libwwmechanize in Perl, by default, will only use IPv4. You have to install a whole extra set of packages to enable v6 support for it, which was something we discovered, which is really annoying, particularly if you have to upgrade your operating system first before you can get the new package version of www.mechanize. And yeah, it starts to turn into the whole yak shaving thing. Next up, we use Munin for graphing services. It draws pretty pictures of what all of our servers do. We have to upgrade Munin to the latest version to get v6 support, because Munin also depends on libwwmechanize because it's written in Perl. We add v6 to the Munin server. Absolutely everything falls over, which is really a bit of a pain. turns out, as soon as we've added our v6 address, Munin has defaulted to talking to everyone over v6. The Munin node config file has a list of people who are allowed to connect to it. So we've got to go around every single managed customer machine and add in a rule that says the v6 address on our Munin server can also talk to you in addition to the v4 address you've been using now. On top of that, it uses a different syntax for v6 hosts in the config file than it does for v4, so that's very annoying. So that all needs updating. It was a boring time because the nice thing about editing config files on customer machines is you have to notify them first. So whilst it's a trivially scriptable problem, the email your entire customer base, say we're making a change, why are you making a change, yes it's safe, and so on, is a bit tedious. But we did it. Add some things into our config generator to correctly escape the addresses, to get the different formats, because the v6 ones need to be in square brackets. Slowly walk through all of our control panel code to find all the other points where people had put nasty little hacks in that look for things that look like v4 addresses and make sure all of those work in a v6 only world. And then the next thing is simple. Turn on v6 by default every time a new managed customer turns up. So everyone has v6 and all of our management services are preferring v6. We have a reporter box that takes reports in from servers. It basically automates the I have a bad feeling about this box, what is it doing thing that experienced people do when they're told, here's a broken box, log in, and it works out what processes are running, what's the current firewall configuration. So when the thing reboots, we can say the reason your stuff doesn't work after a reboot is you forgot to apply your changes last time. This already had a really nasty chunk of code that dealt with NAT firewalls to work out which actual physical machine the report came from. And now it has an even nastier blob of code that sits there and reads the network configuration on all of the machines to work out that yesterday the report came in from a v4 address, today it came in from a v6 address, and actually it's the same machine, so they all need to be stored in the same place. But yeah, that wasn't too bad. We've got a little secure jump box, which is how we log into all of our customer machines. You log into the admin gateway box first. You then ask for a session on a customer machine. We need to migrate our database so that our configuration knows about all the v4 and the v6 addresses the customers are at, so it knows how to get the right key that you can use. But the upside of this is since every request, and the only way to log into any of our customer servers is through our little gateway box, as soon as our gateway has v6 on it, we can do v6 only on customer boxes. And then the fact that I might be connecting from a network that doesn't have v6 isn't a problem for administrating things because I'm always going through a little gateway box. So that's another problem solver. Let's Encrypt. You may have heard of this recently. These guys give free SSL certificates, and IPv6 support is due to be launched tomorrow. So hopefully that's going to work. However, we discovered that once it's sat with NAT64 and behind our reverse proxy, it just works. Straight out of the box, follow the instructions. It's as if the machine has v4 connectivity, even though you're on a v6 only network. So that was a nice surprise. We're now at the point where all of our managed services support v6 only. A managed box that's only got a v6 address looks just like a v4 box. People in the actual world can connect to it. You can run websites on it. It's all looking fine. Then we're in the process of scripting yet more of our automated setup for management, so all these things get set up automatically. And the logic for writing the code to correctly configure the networks, the backups, and everything was getting a bit nasty when you have to deal with single stack v4, dual stack, and single stack v6. And then we said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we just say sod v4? We'll just do v6 only. All of our scripted installs just assume your machine is v6 only, and then at the very last minute, if the customer needs a v4 address, we'll add one in. And that simplifies a whole load of logic, so that made things nice and easy. And so the only question now is how do you get people to buy it? So the first thing we did was we itemized v6 as an item on every invoice, sorry, v4. So if you have to pay more for v4 connectivity, it's cheaper to be v6 only. And all the invoices have a little line item that say IPv4 connectivity. Turns out people in the accounts department have no idea what that means, and so they ask us. And they start asking their technology people, why are we paying for IPv4? What is it? Do we need it? Can we not incur that cost? This is really helpful because technical people really hate talking to accounts. So if there's one thing that will persuade technical people to turn on v6, it's not having to talk to the accounting department and fill in a purchase order. So that's helpful. So who are the customers? To begin with, people like you find here who are practicing v6 want a box somewhere else from a network that actually supports v6. But to be honest, not many of them. Increasingly now, our customers for v6-only hosting are non-technical customers who do not know what an IP address is. We just say, would you like next-generation networking, like the Raspberry Pi website? Yes, please. Is it more expensive? No, it's cheaper. Oh, we'll totally have that. Winner. So we have people, running WordPress blogs and websites. They're v6-only. They don't even know. April Fool's Day. After the Raspberry Pi 3 launch, we got drunk in the pub, and we said, for April Fool's Day, let's put a blog post up that says we're going to host your website on Raspberry Pis. And when we sober up, we said, why does it need to be a joke? So we did it. April Fool's Day, 8 Raspberry Pi 3s. We put the entire website on those Raspberry Pis. We couldn't afford the IP addresses because, again, IP addresses cost almost as much as servers. So each one of those only had a v6 address. There's a little cluster of 8 of them. They distributed out to the front-end network. It worked. It ran for about 3 days. We served something like 10 million requests off 250 quid of computing. All worked very nicely. So next up, Joshua. He runs Griddle Web Hosting, which is a free web hosting service for students. Give free accounts out. He came to us and said, would you like to sponsor us and give free web hosting to students? And I said, yeah, sure. You're not getting an IPv4 address. Well, OK, you can have one for SSH reasons, but that's it. So he had to migrate everything to run in a v6-only environment sitting behind our proxy servers, and it took him 4.5 days to do it, and he's 15. So come on, guys. Someone wants your job, and minimum wage doesn't yet apply to him. So yeah. So basically, that's our quick summary of we do have some v6-only customers, and we're trying to make more of them. And slowly we're getting there. Other than that, you could have already, if you read our blog, you probably already know the entire contents of this. Similarly, if you can't read things that are more than 140 characters long, we're also on Twitter, or otherwise, drop me an email. Otherwise, any questions?
Is this working? Here we go, that's better. That's a great presentation, fantastic. And one of the questions, and it just shows how far we've still got to go 20 years after IPv6 came out. One thing that would be interesting to me is there's people that are running IPv6. Are you seeing any other operational issues? Their website, they're having to phone you, they're kind of generating effort that you would like to avoid?
The biggest one we have is when we get third-party web development companies turn up to people who are v6 only hosted, their first question is, can I have FTP access to the web server? And the answer is no. And to be honest, that's our answer anyway. But they get really stroppy when it's like, no, really, you can't. You're not even on the same network as it. You have to go through the jump box. So that's actually a bonus. But yeah, so far we've not had any particular issues because web applications are really well behaved. Okay. So yeah.
Hi, thank you very much. Tom Hill from Bytemark. As some people will know, this was actually really quite interesting, and I really quite enjoyed it. Thank you. I wanted to ask actually about the NAT64 gateway that you've got set up. It's kind of a two-pronged question. One, have you had any? Have you collected any statistics on how much a typical VM is actually relying upon that versus native IPv6 connectivity? And the second one was, have you had any scaling issues outbound, particularly in the case of if a server gets compromised somehow?
So far, no one's yet compromised a v6-only host, which is probably because the people who are compromising hosts can't use v6, which is another bonus.
There's a big bonus.
Yeah, so far we've not had anything particularly difficult scaling-wise. What we have noticed is if you break your NAT64 service, absolutely every alarm goes off simultaneously, which causes scaling issues on your ability to receive text messages. The only real customer-facing one we had is we broke our NAT64 service, and it turns out the entire educational section of Raspberry Pi automatically builds itself with downloads from GitHub. And there isn't a check in it that says, what do you do if GitHub isn't available? So it deleted it. And this led to an entertaining back and forth of, why have you deleted the entire educational section of our website? We haven't touched it. It wasn't us. And it turns out that, yeah, it's all dependent on our NAT64 service. But that bug in the code is now fixed. It still works if GitHub is down. But yeah, so far it's been OK. But most of our applications just aren't that chatty. They don't talk outbound very often. you know, we're predominantly an outbound network, so, sorry. So yeah, it's not too difficult.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, Greg Chills, 3UK. Do you think there's a definite economic argument here for going V6 only versus V4? You know, larger companies like ourselves, for example, you know, there's an awful lot of investment in V4, and there's no particular reason to go to V6 at the moment because it means thinking about it and actually doing stuff. But, you know, if we can convince the bean counters that, you know, actually they will save money by doing this, then they might go, oh, well, hang on a moment, let's do it then.
Yeah, I mean, for us, dual stack's a pain. Basically, dual stack is more work than single stack, so V6 doesn't really make any economic sense until you can go V6 only and actually say, right, a whole bunch of that stuff we can throw away, and we've got a simpler, cleaner build. And yeah, and so for us, genuinely, V6 single stack is easier than dual stack, and it has an inbuilt cost advantage on V4 single stack. So yeah, you know, for us, yes, it wins.
Okay, cheers.
Dave Freeman from Clarinet. Actually, Tom's asked half of my question, which was about outbound traffic from the NAT64. I wanted to ask the other half of that, which is inbound. So if you receive malicious traffic towards the proxy, it's going back towards the V6 only single stack host. How do you deal with that? Denial of service attacks, for example.
Well, essentially, our reverse proxy is a copy of, you know, Cloudflare will do exactly the same thing. So one of the easy ways you can do it is flip the DNS to Cloudflare and use them to sync all the traffic if you want to. But other than that, so far it's no different to a denial of service against a single machine, except obviously it affects everyone behind the same proxy.
Exactly.
So far we've not had a particular issue. And you can add more proxy servers and sync some of it at the proxy at the front. But yeah, it's not a massive thing we've had to deal with up to now. But the fallback option is always flip the DNS, point it at Cloudflare, let them sync all the traffic. And since they talk V6 quite happily, it works exactly the same. To be honest, we stole the idea off them because they emailed us and said, your V6 servers would be much more use if you told them people about Cloudflare. So yeah. It's solvable in the same way you deal with any other denial service.
Okay, thanks.
Cool.
Thank you, Peter.